What's up, everyone? My name is Ethan. This is Courtside TV. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and let's get into it. So today, I wanted to talk about the end of the regular season. The regular season is over. It's wrapped up. It's done. Records are in the books. So I wanted to take a look back because at the beginning of the year, I made a video about where I thought each team would finish. I made exact win-loss record predictions for every single team in the league, and I wanted to go back and take a look at what I was right about, what I was wrong about, how close I was on a lot of these teams, and just some sort of trends over the season. We'll probably do this again in a little while, maybe after the playoffs are over or the play-in tournament or whatever. But I did want to take a look at, the regular season for each of these teams and what I was right about and what I was wrong about. So here's the Eastern Conference. Over on the left side of your screen there, you will see my personal predictions. You would have seen these if you go back and look at that video from a few months ago before the season started. These are the same. I have not changed them, have not edited them. Just basically put them in a Google Doc and haven't looked at it for the past couple of months. Now revisiting it today, I was looking at these, and I think the biggest mistake I made overall was underrating the bad teams and overrating the good teams. There was a little bit more parity this year. You'll see this in the Western Conference as well, but the good teams, I gave them all super good records. You'll see the Bucks, I gave them 55 wins. The team that had the most wins in the NBA this year, the Jazz, only had 52. The Suns are 51, and those were the only two teams that broke 50. I had a couple of teams breaking 50 in my predictions, so I think that was the biggest thing that I was wrong about. And then these teams at the bottom here, I gave them, I had the Detroit Pistons at 13, the Knicks at 15 wins, Cavs at 16. The lowest amount of wins for any team in the league was the Rockets at 17 over in the Western Conference. In the East here, the Pistons had 20. So kind of a little bit of a disparity between my good teams and bad teams here. Didn't quite get that right, but let's go specifically through each team. Milwaukee, I had at 55 and 17. Felt like they would have another good regular season after, preseason they were coming off of 2 seasons, I believe, having the best record in the league for 2 years in a row, or at least close to it. They were, going off, playing really well. This year they kind of took a little bit of a step back in the regular season. They had, a couple players deal with health and safety protocols and had injuries at points. And this team is sort of, this happens with some really good teams where they kind of, in the regular season, don't take it as seriously, don't play as well, if you know that you're going to be playing more for a title. The Bucks, Giannis's first 2 MVP years were kind of breakout seasons for them, where they kind of leapt themselves into the real contender status. And this season, they kind of have really cemented themselves as one of the best teams in the league, so they didn't play as well. The Brooklyn Nets, I was really close, only 1 win off. This was preseason before they made the James Harden trade, and so I wasn't really sure how good this team was going to be. I felt like Harden was probably going to go to Brooklyn, but obviously you can never be too sure. I just felt like they were a deep roster. Even if they didn't make the Harden move, I still felt like they were going to be really good, and they could have been even better than this, but obviously KD missed a lot of time, Kyrie missed a lot of time, James Harden has missed a lot of time. They've been in and out of the lineup, all 3 of their stars, but even then they've still been a really good team. So just 1 win off on that. It's pretty good. Boston Celtics and Miami Heat, both of which I was a little too optimistic on, specifically Boston. They really struggled to finish at exactly 500. I had them as the third best record in the conference. They clearly underachieved. Had to deal a lot with health and safety. I believe they had the most games missed to health and safety protocols in the entire league. Not that that's the only reason that they haven't been as good, but that's certainly part of it. And now Jaylen Brown is out in there. It's likely that they're going to be out in the first round, if not in the play-in tournament. They might be eliminated. So Boston has clearly had an underwhelming season. Miami, couple wins, too many for them. They also dealt with health and safety. I think that was kind of a theme here with a lot of these good teams have dealt with health and safety protocols, and maybe that's part of the reason why their record is not as good as I projected them to be, just because they've had, there's been a lot more parity in the league this year. Maybe part of that has to do with the health and safety stuff. So Miami was a little bit overrated, but pretty close on them. Toronto Raptors, that was one that I way missed on, but I think a lot of people did. A lot of people had the Raptors up here to begin the season, and honestly, I remember getting some comments saying that I was still underrating the Raptors, having them at the 5 seed. A lot of Raptors fans had a lot of hope for them prior to the season, but I had them low, and I should have, gone lower on them, but part of my reasoning for having them at 5th and not, at like 3rd or 2nd was because they're playing in Tampa Bay, and they had a lot of injuries to deal with and stuff. So I just felt like this team was probably going to take a step back, just because they're playing away from home, and had a couple of changes go over in the offseason. So that one I should have, gone even stronger with my convictions there. Philadelphia kind of, really played played well this year. A lot of people didn't expect them to be as good as they have been, being the number 1 seed. Joel Embiid, had an MVP caliber season. He didn't play enough games to actually win the award, but when he was on the floor, he was one of the best players in the league. And they were just clearly very good. Tobias Harris took a step up. Doc Rivers coached this team very well. Ben Simmons had a good season. So credit to Philly. I definitely was underrating them a little bit. Washington, I was close on them. They were looking dead in the water, for most of the season, and they were down there at like the 12th or 13th seed, and I was like, oh crap, I'm going to be super wrong on the Wizards, but they have really put it together in the last couple of weeks, brought themselves up, and ended up being really close on where the Wizards would finish. So pretty good on that one. Indiana, I was 1 win off on them as well, so really, really close on the Pacers. So that was a nice one. Charlotte Hornets, let's go on my predictions. Atlanta, I had them. I underrated Atlanta as well. They ended up being really, really good. Once they got healthy, about a third of the way into the season, they started to really roll. Trae Young played super well. All their veterans that they brought in gelled, and was able to get this team. I think they kind of capitalized on, teams like Boston and Toronto not being as good, and so the Hawks kind of, stepped up and took that spot. I felt like the Hawks were going to be a good team. I just felt like the East as a whole was a little bit stronger than maybe it ended up being, so that's kind of why I had the Hawks a little bit lower. And then I had the Magic at that 10th spot. They dealt with a lot of injury early on in the season, and then obviously made some big moves at the deadline to trade away pretty much all their veterans aside from Terrence Ross. Don't feel super bad about that Orlando prediction. I think had they stayed healthy and kept all of their guys through the rest of the season, they would have been about there. They ended up with 21 wins. I had them at 32, so it's not like it's crazy. I think had they kept Vucevic and Evan Fournier and Aaron Gordon, they might have ended up closer to that. So, not too crazy there. And then if you look at the teams who I had projected to miss the playoffs, Charlotte is in there. I had them at 29 and 43. They ended up being 4 wins better than that. They really struggled toward the end of the season. I thought that I was going to be really wrong on them. A month or two ago when they were playing super well, they were up at like the 4 or 5 seed in the East. They kind of faded down the stretch of the season, ended up getting a little bit closer to where I had projected them. LaMelo Ball was really good right away. Gordon Hayward fit in well until he was injured. Terry Rozier had a really good season. Miles Bridges stepped up, so they have a good roster. They're deep. They're deeper than I gave them credit for. And specifically LaMelo being as good as he is, right away early on in the league, impacting, winning as much as he has, I think is a major reason why they ended up getting into the play-in tournament. Next, I had the Chicago Bulls at 22 and 50. Like I said, a lot of these bad teams I projected them to have worse records than they actually ended up having. But in terms of where they are in the standings, it was relatively close. Chicago made the trade for Vucevic, and it didn't really make them that much better, to be honest. I think it's going to take them the offseason to gel. I expect they will be a better team next season, but I definitely underrated them just a little bit here. Cavaliers were pretty close to where I had projected them. I gave them less wins than they actually ended up with, but I had them as the 3rd worst team in the conference, and that's where they finished. The New York Knicks is obviously a big miss, but I don't feel bad about that one at all because nobody, and I mean nobody, had the Knicks being as good as they ended up being. The 4 seed in the Eastern Conference is absolutely ridiculous. I was, so surprised to see them up there, and good on them and good for the team. I've kind of talked about this when I made some videos on the Knicks in the past couple weeks, but they've very much overachieved, and I had them projected. That is the 2nd worst record in the league. I had them worse than any team in the Western Conference. You'll see that in a second. So the Knicks, I had them way down there. They definitely overachieved, but I honestly don't feel bad about missing on that because pretty much everybody did. And then the Detroit Pistons, I had them as the worst team in the conference. I had them at 13 wins. They ended up getting 20, so close, but I was right on them being the worst team in the conference, if that counts for anything. And here's the Western Conference. Again, I had, 7 teams here getting to 45 wins, and in reality, only 4 teams ended up getting to that mark or higher, so a pretty big disparity between the best teams in the league and the worst teams, and kind of how I had the wins allocated there, which I will take into account in the future. But the Lakers, I had them as the best record in the conference. I mean, it was impossible not to put them at the top spot simply after the title run that they had. You're assuming everybody's going to be healthy, of course, and it felt like they improved a lot in the offseason, adding Montrezl Harrell and Marc Gasol and Dennis Schroeder and a couple of the other pieces that they ended up getting, right? So the Lakers, obviously LeBron was out for a while, Anthony Davis was out for a while. That's why they're in the play-in tournament right now. But I don't feel bad about having them as the best team in the conference because with all the information available to us at the time, that was the obvious choice. Denver, after making that run to the conference finals, I felt like they were going to really improve. And honestly, I wasn't that far off. Only 3 wins. They ended up, losing Jamal Murray, of course, sucks. They kind of had a slow start to the season and they didn't look super good. But finishing as that 3rd seed in the conference wasn't too far off on Denver. Golden State Warriors, obviously that's a little bit of a homer pick of the biased fan in me, obviously wanting and hoping that they would end up being that high. 48 wins was a lot, I'll admit that, and I probably should have had them a little bit lower, but Steph Curry did miss 9 games, and they were 2-7 in the games that he missed. Had Curry been healthy the whole season, I think they would have been, closer to 45, 46 wins up there, battling for one of those higher seeds. So I still would have been wrong on that team, but it could have been closer had Steph stayed healthy. But obviously every team's dealt with injuries, so, whatever. LA Clippers, I was right on, dead right, exactly right on the Clippers. So I'll take that 4 seed at 47-25. I guess that's kind of just lucky, but that's how I predicted them, and that's where they ended up being so cool on that one. Dallas Mavericks, I had them at the 5th seed as well. They ended up with 4 less wins than I had projected them, but we'll take that as the 5th seed. I predicted Clippers and Dallas in the first round, and that's what we're getting. Portland Trailblazers at the 6th, I was also correct there. Gave them a couple of extra wins, but 42-30, pretty good record. Had them right at the 6th spot in the Western Conference. I had the Jazz way down at the 7th seed, which was probably a little bit pessimistic on my part, but I just felt like a lot of these teams in the conference were better than them. In hindsight, you probably could have put them ahead of a team like Golden State, Dallas, Portland, but realistically in terms of the title race, I think they're right there with the Clippers, Lakers, Nuggets, all these best teams in the conference. They just had a really good regular season. The team really came together, everybody gelled, and played really good basketball. They had a lot of role players step up. Rudy Gobert has had a great season. Donovan Mitchell has had a great season when he's been healthy. Mike Conley has really fit into the system, as he really didn't last year. He had some really rough points last season, but after a year to kind of acclimate and get with the team, Mike Conley's had a really good year as well. So the Jazz are just a team that really overachieved in the regular season. They played super well. Kind of everything came together. They just didn't really make any moves in the offseason, so I didn't have any reason to think that they would be better than they were last year, but it's just one of those cases where a team that's been together for a while kind of found something that made them play really well. So we'll have to see how they perform in the playoffs, but I definitely underrated the regular season Utah Jazz. Phoenix Suns also were a team. I had the Jazz and the Suns right next to each other. They both ended up at 1 and 2. The Suns were a team that I underrated, and I locked on pretty quickly to them early on in the year. Preseason, I was a little bit, back and forth on Phoenix, but after seeing them play, I remember just like 2 weeks into the year, I was like, yeah, I was totally like underrating this team. I think they're one of the best teams in the conference. Like seeing how Chris Paul and Devin Booker played together, I was like, okay, yeah, this team is going to be pretty good. So I pretty quickly caught on to the Suns as one of the top teams in the conference, but preseason I wasn't quite convicted enough to be able to make that prediction. New Orleans Pelicans, I definitely overrated them a little bit. I had them at 38 wins. This is a team that just didn't really fit. Obviously, Zion had a great season. Brandon Ingram was just as good as he was last year. And I felt like they had good role players, Lonzo Ball, Steven Adams, Eric Bledsoe, Josh Hart. I felt like they had a relatively deep team, and hoping that Zion would take that leap. And Zion did take that leap, and like I said, Ingram was just as good. But the rest of the team never really came together. They never found the correct spacing. Van Gundy, I always thought he would be a good coach, but he doesn't seem like he's the right exact fit for this team, so who knows what's going to happen there. But Pelicans, I was definitely overrating a little bit. Grizzlies, I had them around the right spot, just didn't give them quite enough credit on their win total. They ended up being over 500. I had them a little bit under. So Memphis, they're the 9th or the 10th spot in the Western Conference. I think that's pretty much where everybody had them, and that's about where they ended up being. So pretty good there on the Grizzlies. And then the Houston Rockets at 11. We have to remember that preseason James Harden was still on the team, and we weren't sure what was going to happen with them. They had traded Russell Westbrook. They had made a couple of moves, obviously the coaching change and some turnover in the front office. But the Rockets were, like James Harden's still there. What are they going to end up getting back for him? Were they going to do the Ben Simmons move, or was it going to be the Nets for pieces and picks? Are they going to get Dinwiddie back? Are they going to get, Karis LeVert back? What's going to be the return? And had
they elected to, you know, take somebody like Ben Simmons or like Dinwiddie, LeVert, Jared Allen, and like a bunch of stuff from the Nets rather than just going for picks in Victor Oladipo, I think they would have ended up being better. But this team really just committed to a full tank after trading James Harden away, and I can't say I blame them because there's no use in being the 11th seed in the Western Conference if you can be the bottom seed and have the best odds for the number 1 pick. So the Rockets, while, you know, I don't feel super bad about this prediction because of the uncertainty with James Harden, it was kind of just like throw your hands up in the air and take a wild guess. Minnesota was, you know, not as good as I had projected them to be. They dealt with a lot of injury. D'Angelo Russell missed time, Karl Anthony Towns missed time, and Anthony Edwards has had a really, really good rookie season, but hasn't really impacted winning a ton yet. So this team is actually really good when all those 3 of those guys are playing together. I believe they're above 500 or close to it. So I think if we had had health for them the whole season, they would have been around that win total, maybe a little bit higher, but they ended up being a little bit lower, and they kind of turned into a tanking team, and they still might give away their first round pick, who knows. But the Wolves, I had them, you know, right around the right spot. After they had the worst record in the league for most of the season, they ended up with like the 3rd worst record in the conference and like the 6th worst record, I think, in the league overall. San Antonio, I underrated them for sure. I just felt like they didn't make many moves over the offseason. They weren't that good last year. Felt like they would get worse. In reality, a lot of the young players got better. DeMar DeRozan had an awesome season. Greg Popovich coached them well. So they ended up getting themselves into the play-in tournament. So good on the Spurs. Definitely underrated them a little bit. Sacramento, also underrating them. They just also was a team that didn't really make that many moves over the offseason. But De'Aaron Fox kind of took a leap. Buddy Hield turned in a good season. Tyrese Halliburton was good right away. So underrated the Kings a little bit, but they still didn't make the play-in tournament. And then OKC, I had them as the worst record in this conference. And, you know, they were really good early on in the season, but full hard committed to that tank after the All-Star break. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander goes out. They bench Al Horford. You know, pretty much all the veterans. They decided to sit them down the stretch run of the season. I even, you know, underrated them still a little bit. They ended up getting more wins than I thought they were going to, but you know, they were the worst team in the conference, and they were the 2nd worst team in the conference. I projected them to be the worst. So, you know, nothing crazy there on the Thunder. So yeah, I think stuff to take moving forward is, you know, getting that balance of bad teams and good teams correct. I think that a lot of that was particular to this season, you know, having a lot of teams dealing with health and safety that kind of even things out a little bit. But even in the shortened season, you know, having teams with only like 17 or 16 losses was probably a little bit too ambitious on my part there, because, you know, like I said, the Jazz ended up with the best record in the league and they were 52-20, and the Suns were only 1 game behind that. But pretty much everybody else, you know, nobody even really got close, because I had the Lakers and the Bucks, I think, both with 17 losses, and, you know, that just didn't really end up being the reality. I was a little too boxed into what had happened the previous season. I just kind of rolled with the teams that were already good to continue being good, where in reality it does fluctuate from year to year. It might not necessarily impact in the playoffs, but there are just certain teams that maybe, you know, didn't make huge improvements over the offseason that might just come together and play well in the regular season. We've seen that, you know, this year specifically with a team like the Jazz and the 76ers, just kind of being similar to years past, but really just clicking and finding a way to make it work better. So I think I'll definitely take a lot of those things into consideration more when I make my predictions for next season and going forward and beyond, because I plan to do this every year, at least for the foreseeable future. So yeah. But yeah, that's all I have on my recaps for my season predictions. Like I said at the top of the video, if you're new, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, ring the bell if you want to. Leave a comment letting me know what you guys think about these. What was I the most right about? What was I the most wrong about? I guess I kind of already went over that. But feel free to flame me in the comments for not picking the New York Knicks as the 4th seed. But I'm sure that you didn't either, let's be honest. But yeah, with all that said, I'll see you guys in the next one.